Here is part two of my program on names, words of many facets. Well, as I said in part one, I started with names in the earliest human life. It was a very limited number or types of names that people had eons and eons ago, basically in the lives of hunters and gatherers. But millennia and millennia and millennia later, in ancient Rome, around 2,000 years ago, the world had developed to a point, it was a very complex society. That city in those days had maybe as much as 1 million people, and they had all kinds of things that they had names for that I talked about. Many categories of names. And I'm not going to go into all of that again, but refer you, if you didn't go through it in part one of this presentation, you should go through it as a predicate for understanding what I'm going to be talking about today in the United States. Well, like people from time immemorial, we have personal names. We have a first name. Most of us, many of us, have a middle name, and we have a last name, our family name. Well, over the course of time, names are like a lot of things. We have changes in society and fashions. When I was growing up in the 1950s, I didn't know any girls named Crystal or Heather. I didn't know or heard of any boys named Jamal or Hakeem. But starting in the 1960s, things changed, and we have a lot of different types of names, especially these first names. And not only that, but about the same time, the immigration policies of the United States changed and became a lot broader, so that we have people who, in those decades, have come from parts of the world that before that we really didn't have them from those parts of the world. So they brought different types of names. So here I have photos of some people who have interesting names. There's Ketanji Brown Jackson, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. There's Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist. He was born in Paris of parents of Chinese heritage. When he was 7, his family moved to the United States, and that's where he grew up, and that's where he's been based. Then in the lower left, there's Vivek Ramaswamy. He was born in Cincinnati of parents from India. He is now running to be the governor of Ohio. And then in the lower right, a former president of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. There are some interesting names for you. And of course, we have, like people from time immemorial, names for groups of people, our neighbors, the Canadians, the Mexicans. We have place names, nothing remarkable there. Geographical features, the Rocky Mountains, the Ohio River, nothing remarkable there. Then we have religion, like the Romans. Well, okay, we have a religion. Well, we have more than one religion. The predominant religion in the United States is Christianity, and Christianity has a lot of names. The Christians recognize a supreme being whom they call God. They recognize a prophet, a leader, whose name in English is Jesus. They have a set of scriptures that they call the Bible. It's divided into a number of books, each of which has a name. The Gospel according to Luke, the letter of Paul to the Ephesians, and all the rest of them, and all kinds of important figures. There's the 12 apostles, the 4 evangelists, Paul, who wrote many letters, and some branches of Christianity recognize a lot of saints, each by name. And of course, there is a photo of Da Vinci's famous painting, The Last Supper, completed in 1498, with Jesus and the 12 apostles. Christianity recognizes various doctrines, each of which has a name. Christianity is not a uniform religion. It's divided into denominations and sub-denominations, each of which has a name. And there are congregations and buildings. There are photos of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York and the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Now, the other major religions, I won't go into detail, but I have the impression that even though they have different beliefs and different doctrines and different traditions and different histories and all, they have similar usage of names. For example, a mosque has a name, a synagogue has a name, a Hindu, a Buddhist temple has a name, just as examples. Just as the Romans recognized different languages by name, we recognize different languages by name. Here is a sign in Houston telling people where to go to vote. It's in 4 languages that we call English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Features of the nighttime sky. As the Romans and many people before them, we recognize planets and stars and constellations, and we have names for them. But with modern science, and particularly modern telescopes, we know more about the universe than people knew in the past just using the naked eye. First of all, there's the subject of the comet. The Romans were aware of comets. They didn't quite exactly know what they were. They just thought they were these unusual stars. But they had a word that they called these things. It was cometes, which they got from the Greeks. The Greek word is kometes. It means comet, but its original meaning was having long hair. Well, I think you can see the basis for that. Around 1700, there was a scientist in England named Edmund Halley. And this comet had appeared recently, and he came to the conclusion that this was not unique. It was the recurrence of the same thing that had appeared from time to time in the past and had been recorded by various people over the centuries. Edmund Halley was a contemporary and friend of Isaac Newton. Well, anyway, this comet has come to be known as Halley's Comet. And it's the only short period comet visible to the naked eye. It last appeared in 1986, and it's next scheduled to appear in 2061. We then have asteroids that we can see with modern telescopes. These are these sort of big rock like structures. They're too small to be identified as planets, but some of the larger and more significant ones have been given names. And the International Astronomical Union has issued a set of guidelines for naming these asteroids. Modern telescopes can also see these structures that we call nebulas. Nebula comes from a Latin word meaning cloud. And these are these strange looking things, well, cloud like. There's a photo of one. It's part of what's called the Eagle Nebula. And these structures here in the photo are called the pillars of creation. And what these things are sort of dense clusters of stars and protostars and dust and gas and stuff. But anyway, there they are. And then we've given them names. Then there's galaxies, our own galaxy we call the Milky Way. The calendar. The calendar we have today is, I would call it 95% the same as the calendar that Julius Caesar promulgated on January the 1st, 45 BC. The difference is in the 16th century, Pope Gregory the 13th convened some experts to deal with an anomaly in the calendar that involved fixing the formula for leap year. So there is a photo of Pope Gregory, and the calendar we have today is called the Gregorian calendar. We have taken the names of the months from the Romans, January, February, March, etc. Days of the week around, I'm going to say, roughly 1500 years ago, the Germanic people of Northern Europe took the calendar from the Romans. And by then, the Romans had adopted the 7-day week with the system that I mentioned before, naming the days of the week after the sun and the moon and the 5 planets. The Germanic peoples translated the names of the days of the week into their languages. So, for example, in England, they took the Roman name Dies Solis, the day of the sun, and they translated it into Sonanday, which is modern English Sunday. They took the Latin name Dies Lunae, the day of the moon, and translated it into Monanday, modern English Monday. And the next day in Latin, Dies Martis, the day of Mars. Well, Mars to them was their god Tu. So that became Tuesday Day, which in modern English is Tuesday, and so forth. Anyway, we have names for the months and names for the days of the week. Structures and public facilities. Like the Romans, well, we build lots of things and we give them names. There's nothing remarkable or unusual here. There's the Capitol, there's the Astrodome, and all these other things. The government, they call their government the Res Publica, the Republic. We call our government the United States of America. There it is on the back of the $1 bill. And we have lots of other names for states, territories, counties, townships, cities, branches, departments, and agencies. Lots and lots of these. Not particularly remarkable. Laws and court decisions. As I mentioned, the Romans The Senate, when they passed laws, each law had a name. We give names to lots of the laws that we pass. For example, after the stock market crashed in 1929, Congress enacted two significant laws. One was called the Securities Act of 1933, another, the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. We still use those names today. As an aside, I want to focus people's attention on the photo there. Today, if you were zooming in to that man's head, you would think he's holding a phone and talking on a phone. But in 1929, they didn't have mobile phones. So he's holding his hand to his head. And what does that mean? Anxiety, maybe even despair. Well, anyway, the Romans had means of settling disputes with magistrates and judges and people, but as far as I know, these decision makers didn't issue written opinions, and so there's nothing in writing that, at least, that has survived about what they may have decided. But we have a tradition going back to England of courts often issuing written opinions, and each one has a name. The typical format of a name of a judicial opinion is the name of the plaintiff versus and the name of the defendant. This is one that's well known. It's usually referred to as Brown versus Board of Education. The full name is Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. It came out of Kansas. But anyway, this is just one of thousands of judicial opinions, each with a name. Well, like ancient Rome, we have a number of organizations. We have the military and the various branches and subdivisions of the military, each has a name. The Romans had their Praetorian Guard. We have the Secret Service. We have other services. We have the FBI, the Border Patrol, the various state and local agencies. And now, much in the news, we have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. The Romans, education for them was basically an elite process involving private tutors. Schools, colleges, and universities as we know them did not exist. The first university was founded in 1088 in Bologna, for example. But today we have, in this country, we have thousands of schools, colleges, and universities. There is a photo of the academic quadrangle of my alma mater, Rice University. Clubs. We have lots of clubs. We have country clubs, city clubs, fraternities, sororities, garden clubs, all kinds of things, each one with a name. The healthcare profession. I have read that in many states, the healthcare profession is the largest employer. Well, it's organized into clinics and hospitals, each one with a name. Then we have charitable organizations, thousands of them, doing all kinds of things. Social service, like the American Red Cross, the Houston Food Bank, museums, performing arts organizations, symphonies, ballet companies, opera companies, theater companies, all the rest of them. And the list goes on and on, each of which with a name. Like the Romans, we have ships and we give names to our ships. The photo here is a ship called the Voyager of the Seas. It's a cruise ship run by the Royal Caribbean Line. Well, one of many examples. The Romans didn't have airplanes, but here's an example of one that has a name, Air Force One. The Romans certainly didn't have spacecraft. You've heard of Apollo 13. Apollo 13 is actually the name of a mission. Well, as we all know, it had some problems, but the people were able to fix the problems and the astronauts were able to return to Earth. And it was a subject of a famous movie in 1995. Well, the spacecraft had a name. Its name was the Apollo LEM. LEM stands for Lunar Excursion Module. For almost 200 years, we've had trains. There was a famous luxury train service called the Orient Express that went from Europe to Istanbul and back. But here in the United States, we also have train services that have names. For example, the city of New Orleans, which is a train service that goes back and forth between New Orleans and Chicago. So please hear what Arlo Guthrie had to say about this in 1972.
Good morning, America, how are you? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done.
The Romans had their written works, they had their theater, they had oratory. Well, with the invention of the printing press over 500 years ago, we have a lot more than that. We have, I mean, in spite of, the internet, we have lots of books and newspapers and magazines, each of which has a name. The Romans had their theater that they were fond of. We have our theater that we are fond of. Here's a scene from a recent Broadway hit. It has a name. It's called Hamilton. And then we have, starting a little more than 100 years ago, we have thousands of films. And starting in the 1950s, we have lots and lots of TV shows, each of which has a name. Arts. Roman art, from what I can tell, was basically a sort of personal, domestic sort of thing. They had sculpture, they had lots of mosaics as decorations of their houses, and frescoes and friezes. They had reliefs and things. If there was anything that was soft, like a modern painting, it didn't survive. And I don't think they had anything like the modern, well, they didn't have museums and they didn't have anything like the modern art market, from what I can tell. But we have lots of paintings, museums all over the world, full and full and full of paintings. Most of them have names. Occasionally, you come across one where the label on the wall says untitled, but most of them have names. Here's a famous one done by Van Gogh in 1899, and we call it Starry Night. It's now in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Sculpture. Well, as I said, the Romans had sculpture. But whether they gave names to these pieces, I can't tell, but we certainly do. Here's one. Well, the original goes back 2,500 years ago to Greece to a sculptor named Myron, and it's been copied many times over the centuries. We call it Discobolus, which is a Latin, or I think it probably even goes back to Greek. It means discus thrower. But anyway, that's the name we give to that. Music. In ancient Rome, they enjoyed a lot of music, but I think, frankly, from what I can tell, it was mostly improvised. I don't think they had a tradition of notation where they would write it down and distribute it as something that was to be performed in the same way. But certainly by 1600 in Europe, we had developed a tradition of writing down music. We had developed a system of notation. And with the printing press being there, music was written down. It was identified by composer and title, that is the name of the particular piece of music. And the scores were then printed and distributed widely. So, just some examples: Bach's St. Matthew Passion, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. But, I mean, this is not just what we would call classical music. I mean, today, all kinds of music is written down and distributed in this fashion, and everything has a name. Recently, Taylor Swift issued an album, and it has a name: The Life of a Showgirl. Events. The Romans observed lots of special events. Each one had a name. We do the same thing. Here is Norman Rockwell's famous image of American Thanksgiving, issued in 1943. Well, there's a lot to say about this. Well, anyway, it's the celebration we call Thanksgiving. But anyway, there's a really interesting backstory about this image, and there's been a lot of cultural commentary about it. But I'll let you pursue that if you want to. But not all events are happy ones. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan, and this came to be known as the Second World War or World War II. For example, the United States is subject to these terrible storms called hurricanes. Here is an image of New Orleans 20 years ago in 2005 when it was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. Here are National Guard people evacuating people through the floodwaters. For a long time, these storms, there was no systematic way of referring to them. For example, the big storm that destroyed Galveston in 1900 and killed several thousand people, it was referred to as the Great Storm of 1900. Well, starting in 1953, the National Hurricane Center, which is a branch of the National Weather Service, which is a branch of the Department of Commerce. Just note that those are all names. Anyway, they started giving names to hurricanes. They gave them women's names. This is starting in 1953. Well, after a while, that became controversial. So in 1979, the National Hurricane Center started naming hurricanes in each season alternately after men and women and men and women and men and women. So, and that's the practice that we have today. Well, it's not just hurricanes. In the past few years, we've noticed a lot of wildfires in the West, particularly in California, but there have been some in Oregon and other places. And there's no systematic way of naming these fires, but a sort of ad hoc way has developed. A local authority will give a name to a fire, and the name gets picked up by the media, and that's what the fire comes to be known. Here is a scene from the area of Los Angeles called the Pacific Palisades, and there was a terrible fire there, and it was named the Palisades Fire. This is just one of many examples. Sports. Sports is a huge enterprise in the United States, all the way from Little League Baseball to high school sports, think Friday Night Lights, to college sports, to professional sports, to the Olympics. Sports altogether add over $70 billion to this country's economy, which is around 2.3% of gross domestic product. But that's not the point. The point here is sports involves a lots of names. We have lots of organizations. We have Major League Baseball, that's their name. We have the Women's National Basketball Association, that's their name. And speaking of the WNBA, there she is, Caitlin Clark, in action. We have all these teams, they each have a name. We have all the facilities, they each have a name, all these stadiums and arenas and ballparks. Competitions have names. The World Series, that's a name. The Final Four, that's a name. And then there's the big blowout, the Super Bowl. There you see a photo of the most recent one in New Orleans. And there up above is the name of the facility where it was held, Caesars Superdome. Sports stars. Our professional athletes typically play under their real names, which is a point I'm going to get to here a bit later. But we have some other sports stars. Here is a photo of one. Here is the horse that won this year's Kentucky Derby. His name is Sovereignty. He is owned by somebody named Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum. Well, there's a name for you. What does that name suggest? It suggests a man who's a Muslim. Well, yes, he is in fact the Emir of Dubai. But anyway, the horse's name is Sovereignty. Now, going to entertainers who are not athletes, it is not rare to find people who took on or who have taken on new names. Here is Kirk Douglas. His real name, well, he was born in upstate New York of parents who were immigrants from Russia. His real name was Isur Danielovich. Here is Rock Hudson. His real name was Roy Harold Scherer Jr. Here is Charlie Sheen. His real name is Carlos Irwin Estevez. Here is Audrey Hepburn. She was born in Belgium of parents from different backgrounds. Her original name was Edda von Heemstra Hepburn Ruston. Marilyn Monroe. Her original name was Norma Jean Mortensen. Lady Gaga. Her real name is Stephanie Joanne Angelina Germanata. Now we have rappers. Here is Eminem. His real name is Marshall Mathers. Then we have Snoop Dogg. His real name is Calvin Broadus. Like the Romans, we have commercial buildings. We have apartment buildings and we give them names. Here is one of the most famous American apartment buildings on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's called the Dakota. It was built in the 1880s. It's been the home of some well known people, including John Lennon, Leonard Bernstein, Rosemary Clooney, and Joe Namath. We have shopping malls like the Romans. You know, the iconic one here in Houston has a name, the Galleria. Well, here's a photo of the original Galleria in Milan. The Romans didn't have office buildings, but we have lots of them. And here's a photo of two iconic ones. There in the foreground is the Empire State Building, and in the background is the Chrysler Building. Those are their names. Pets. The Romans like their pets. We love our pets. According to Capital One Bank, last year we Americans spent over $150 billion on our pets in terms of acquiring pets, taking pets to the vet, feeding pets, grooming pets, boarding pets, and all the rest of it. We obviously give names to our pets. And like some Romans, we create memories to our pets when they die. Here are some photos of tombstones that modern people have prepared in memory of their pets. The one in the upper right, I just have to say, it reminds me of what Bill Clinton said when he was president. If you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. And in the bottom, I don't know whether you can zoom in and look at the names on these tombstones, but some of the names that you see on these tombstones are Kaiser, Tiger, Noodles, and Puss Puss. Well, what's it a name? We're going to start in Cleveland, Ohio. For a long time, Cleveland has sponsored a professional baseball team, which for a long time was called the Indians. And there was their symbol. There's the name, and there is an image of, well, an Indian. Well, this became controversial in recent years. Some Native American groups and other people objected to it, saying it's insensitive, it's, just not right. And so the owners of the team, a family, decided to change the name of the team to the Cleveland Guardians. Anyway, there is the new logo, sort of a flying baseball with the letter G there on each side. And this name Guardian is not a random thing. There is a bridge in Cleveland called the Hope Memorial Bridge that goes over the Cuyahoga River. And when it was built in the 1930s, they erected these big statues. There you can see the photo done in the Art Deco style. Anyway, these are called the guardians of traffic. So that name guardian there is significant in Cleveland. By the way, the creators of Superman lived in Cleveland. So you could say that Superman was born in Cleveland. But there's another aspect of this, and that is the name Superman, a fictional name. Think of that as a category. It's not just Superman, there's Mickey Mouse, there's Wonder Woman, there are lots of others like that. So, anyway, add that to your list of types of names. We now move to Washington, D.C. Since 1937, Washington has had a professional football team that for many years was called the Redskins. And there is what was their symbol. Well, as in Cleveland, this became the subject of criticism. And so a couple of years ago, the owners of this team renamed it as the Commanders. That's their new symbol, a stylized letter W, and they've taken the colors from the original symbol, the dark red and the yellow. Well, this has turned out to be a subject of political commentary.
For those of us that live here in the district, you said when you came in, you were going to make Washington, D.C. great again.
Right.
One of the issues we've got right now is we understand there might be an imminent deal between the owner of the Washington football team, whatever you want to call them now, Commanders, and locally in getting the Redskins back to D.C. and RFK Stadium. That's on federal property.
Right.
Are you going to be involved in that negotiation?
Yeah.
And would one of the stipulations be they changed their name back to the Redskins?
Oh, I see. Well, that's a little bit. Nobody's asked me that one. Look, I think when the Indian population is a great part of this country, a great heritage, and we were talking about Massapequa, Long Island, the Chiefs. They call themselves the Chiefs, or the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not changing their name. A great team, great people, great owners, great coach and quarterback. I love the quarterback. Like his girlfriend too, and his wife. His wife is great. She's been a big fan. His quarterback's mother is incredible. I like that team. They're called the Chiefs, and frankly, I see nothing wrong with it. They call them the Warriors, and not that team, but a lot of other teams, and all of these Indian surnames and different names. And I'm saying that I think that's a positive thing. And when you go back to Indians, they polled this. They don't know why these names are being taken off. They're trying to. I think it's degrading to the Indian population, and it's a great population, and they like when they're called by various names. Now, Washington, the Redskins, perhaps that's a little bit different, but I can tell you that I spoke to people of Indian heritage that love that name and they love that team, and I think it's I think it's a superior name to what they have right now, and it had heritage behind it. It had something special. But a lot of the names having to do with, different places, not just Indians, but I think it's, they changed the name of the Cleveland Indians. Why would you take the name Indians off the Cleveland Indians? And now it's called the Cleveland something else.
Guardians.
Right? Guardians. It just doesn't make sense to me. So we're about bringing common sense back to this country. And it may be popular or unpopular what I'm saying and I've just said to you. See, he's a nice guy. He got a lot out of me on this one, but I think most people agree with me. I think it really is demeaning to Indians. But to change the name of the Cleveland Indians, as an example, to the Cleveland Guardians is not the same, and I'm sure it has an impact on the team.
Well, the plot thickens. This team originally played for a long time in a stadium in the city, in the district, it came to be known as RFK Stadium. But the neighborhood where it was, how shall I put it? It came to have seen better days. And it was no longer an attractive place for people to go to attend a football game. So the team moved to a stadium in the suburbs in Maryland, which is where they had been playing since 1997. Well, the owners of the team have come up with a plan to build a new stadium there in the city in place of the old RFK Stadium. And not just to build a new stadium, but to redevelop that part of town, to add apartments and hotels and restaurants and shopping and a lot of other things. The total cost of this would be $3.7 billion. Well, this project has received preliminary approval from the Washington City Council. But where would you get all that money? And I think the expectation is some of it they would want to get from the federal government. Well, President Trump has made some comments about this to the effect that any negotiation to get money for this project from the federal government would involve a discussion about the name of the football team. So we'll have to wait and see how all of this plays out. Well, is there more to come? Atlanta has a professional baseball team named the Braves, and there is their symbol with their name and a tomahawk. Kansas City has a professional football team known as the Chiefs, and there is their symbol with an arrowhead. Both of these clear references to Native American culture. There have been some mumblings and grumblings about each of these in terms of the names and the symbols. So far, what you see is what is still there. So, another situation of wait and see. Well, what's in a name yet more? We go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, an army base established around the time of the First World War. It was named after a general who was in the Confederate Army. A couple of years ago, under the previous administration in Washington, it was renamed Fort Liberty. But earlier this year, under the current administration, it was renamed Fort Bragg. And the announcement said it was named after Roland L. Bragg, who served in the Army during the Second World War. He was originally from Maine. He trained there at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. He became a paratrooper. And during the war, he made 30 jumps into combat. He had the rank of private first class. And for his service, he was awarded the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. Fort Hood, Texas, also goes back to the time of the First World War. It was named after another Confederate general, John Bell Hood. 2 years ago, it was renamed Fort Cavazos after Richard Cavazos. Richard Cavazos served for a long time in the Army. He achieved the status of a four-star general. He was the first person of Hispanic descent to achieve that rank. Well, earlier this year, this fort was renamed Fort Hood back to its original name after Colonel Robert B. Hood. This man served in the First World War and received the Distinguished Service Cross. Well, it continues. Meet a United States naval ship called the Oscar V. Peterson. It's a specialized type of service vessel called an oiler. It was placed in service in 2023, and it was originally named the Harvey Milk in honor of the gay rights activist Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk served in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War and afterwards. He was an officer. He achieved the rank of lieutenant junior grade. In 1955, he resigned his commission rather than face a court martial. The basis of the court martial was he was a homosexual. Well, he went on to a political career in San Francisco and was elected to the Board of Supervisors, which is what they call their city council. And in 1978, he was assassinated by a disgruntled former member of that board and became something of a hero in the gay community. Earlier this year, the Secretary of Defense announced that this ship, the Harvey Milk, would be renamed in honor of Oscar V. Peterson. Now, Oscar Peterson served in the Navy during the Second World War. He had the rank of Chief Petty Officer. He was killed in the Battle of the Coral Sea, and posthumously, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. Well, it continues. As I was about to finish this presentation, President Trump signed an executive order to rename the Department of Defense as the Department of War. This agency was originally named the Department of War at its founding in 1789 under George Washington. In 1949, Congress passed legislation to reorganize the military, and this agency was then given the name the Department of Defense. So, well, like some other things that have been going on, there's a legal issue here. If Congress gave it that name by legislation, does the president have the authority by executive action to change it? But again, wait and see. Then we have the subject of the company. This idea was minimally developed in the ancient world. In ancient Rome, almost all commerce was conducted by individuals under their personal names, whether they be landowners or traders or shopkeepers or people who made things like potters. We have some evidence of joint ownership. For example, this famous figure Cicero is said to have owned a 1/8 interest in an apartment building. But the age of European expansion led to the creation and proliferation of what they call joint stock companies, really for two reasons. One, the need to raise a lot of money to conduct all these expeditions that they had to do. And secondly, the individuals wanted to limit their personal liability. But the point here is each company that was established had a name. For example, the one that that people usually call the East India Company, the original name was the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies. Now, it wasn't formed by a simple somebody just filling out a form. It was formed in 1600 by a royal charter granted by Queen Elizabeth I. That's what you had to do in those days to form a company. It took a special act of the government. But during the 19th century, the different countries and the states in the United States, they developed systems to make the formation of a company routine. But each one had a unique name. And today, forming a company is very simple. You do it online. But the form you fill out, the first line item that you have to fill in is a name, and it has to be unique. Well, and you pay a modest fee, but then you have a company. The brand. The idea of a brand was developed to some extent in ancient Rome. We find ceramics and amphoras, which are these big storage jars, and lamps and glassware, and maybe some other things that have marks on them. You could call them maker's marks. There are a few things that have a name on them, but this doesn't seem to have been very well developed. It's almost, from what I can tell, it's something that really may have catered to the elite rather than to the ordinary person. But when we come to the Industrial Revolution, starting maybe around 200 years ago, the idea of the brand really took off. You have companies making things using mass production, and they want to identify them with their name. And they don't want people copying their name or copying their mark. In the legal world, you have the development of trademark laws. In 1870, Congress passed a trademark act to enable people to register their name or their trademark. The first one that was registered, there is a photo of it, the Averill Chemical Paint Company, and there is their symbol. And this was soon followed in the United Kingdom. And the first trademark to be registered in the UK was by the Bass Brewing Company. And that's their name and the red triangle. And the red triangle became something of one of the most famous commercial images in the UK for decades. Today, we have a huge number of brands, many using names. Some of them don't, like the Nike swoosh. It's an abstract symbol, but a lot of companies use a stylized version of their name as a brand, and some of them also have a symbol, like Amazon has the curved arrow, and Rolex has the crown along with its name. And brand management is an important part of American business, just in terms of managing your brand and brand management, brand strategy are subjects that are taught in business schools. The development of a complex society involves many new categories of names. I was born in 1947, and here is a list of things along with examples of names that did not exist then. The word software was first used in terms of computer programming in 1958. I was 11 years old then. Now we have all kinds of software, each of which has a name. For example, PowerPoint. That's a software that I've been using for this presentation. The internet came on the scene, maybe 35 years ago, 30 to 35 years ago. And we have all these websites. Now there are, millions of websites. Something.com, something.net, something.edu, and the rest of them, each with a name. Browsers. The first commonly used browser was launched in 1994. That's 31 years ago. It was called Netscape Navigator. There were a number of different browsers, but it's now kind of gotten consolidated. So the main one that people use is Google Chrome, which has around 2/3 of the market share. Then we have social media. Facebook was created by Mark Zuckerberg and friends in 2004 as a means for college students to communicate with one another. But they soon realized that it had a much larger application. So the next year in 2005, they launched what is essentially now the modern version of Facebook. So that was 20 years ago. Then, very recently, coming on the scene is artificial intelligence. And probably the iconic service that you see of that is ChatGPT. It was launched less than 3 years ago on November 30th, 2022. Well, as an aside, I'm just going to say I have not used ChatGPT or anything similar to prepare this presentation. I've done it the old fashioned way. Well, then what about the username and the password? What do you think about the username? Well, I think it's a sort of name. It's kind of an artificial name. It's a means that we use to identify ourselves on a secure website. So it's a kind of name. I don't think a password is a name. It's a, artificial construct. It's kind of a code. It's supposed to be an arbitrary combination of letters and numbers and symbols and things. But anyway, these are all new categories of names that have come up during my lifetime. As I said, the Industrial Revolution led to the creation of companies with names and mass produced consumer products and services with branded names. Then I also mentioned the legal protection of brands, including names, trademark law. I want to conclude by talking about the multidimensionality of names. Names have, well, as I said in the title, many facets. There's been a lot of attention in the scholarly literature to personal names. And as we all recognize, names can signal various things about people: sex, ethnicity, national origin, religion, socioeconomic status. A name, Ari Goldberg, that person is probably a Jewish male. Somebody named Latanya Washington, she's probably an African American female. Somebody named Sanjay Gupta, he's probably a male of Indian Hindu background. Women, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Those names suggest people of a certain elevated socioeconomic status. Then we have fashions in names. In 1947, the year that I was born, the most common name given to a newborn girl was Linda. The most common name given to a newborn boy was James. Last year in 2024, it was Olivia and Liam. And you can look up and see during all the intermediate years how fashions have changed. And well, anyway, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to personal names. I've also noted that names in the public sphere can be the subject of cultural and political commentary. But what I want to finally say is I think the really interesting subject here and a real frontier is the psychology and neuroscience of names. I think of names as cognitive markers. They're like signposts, they're like street signs to help us humans navigate around our increasingly complex world. Think of maps. Think of the brain as, a complex set of maps, and names are part of how we work. I've always been fascinated with maps. When I was young, I loved maps, the old fashioned paper maps. My favorite subject in elementary school was geography, which focused on maps with mountains and valleys and rivers and lakes and towns and highways and forests and deserts and things. Well, anyway, that's how I think about all this. And again, all the different types of names that we deal with, the world of society, our family, our neighbors, our friends, physical space, our neighborhood, where we live, where we shop, going to and from work, the world of work. How many names do you deal with in an ordinary day in your world of work, and what types of names? All the organizations we deal with, religious organizations, charitable organizations, leisure and entertainment, books and magazines, and newspapers and websites and films and TV shows and all the rest of it, the world of commerce, companies and all those brands, the government we deal with, and all the rest of it. Well, I just think it's interesting and an area to explore. How do our brains deal with not just all these names, but as the world develops and we come up with new categories of things and new types of names, how do we deal with it all? Here are some references. Here's some more references. Here's how you can contact me if you want to get in touch. Next. Here are some previous works that I've written that if you're interested in any of these topics, I would invite you to go to them. And in conclusion, I want to thank you for joining me. And I want to wish you the best in trying to remember all the names that you deal with in your life and trying to keep track of all those names, including but not limited to all of your usernames. Thank you.